All right, this is the big one. Kamaru Usman against Jorge Masvidal for the welterweight champion of the world. Now, look, this fight is one of the things that I was going to add to the list of shit things that have happened in 2020 because we all thought this fight isn't going to happen. And then all of a sudden, over the weekend, the MMA god smiled at us. And before you knew it, Jorge Masvidal was in and Gilbert Burns was out. Now, look, I'm not going to break this fight down technically. I'm just going to share a few observations that I've made over the last few days, and these observations are things that might potentially impact the outcome of the fight come Saturday night. So the first thing I want to talk about, and I feel like this might have a bit of an impact on Jorge Masvidal, is the fact that his head coach Mike Brown has tested positive for COVID, so he won't be there. He won't be there in his corner come fight night, not come fighting out. Now look, I don't know whether Mike Brown not being in his corner is going to have a huge impact. Where I think it's going to have more of an impact, potentially it could have more of an impact, is Mike Brown not being with Jorge Masvidal over the next few days, helping him make weight, being a calming influence in the build-up to the biggest fight of Jorge Masvidal's career. Jorge Masvidal spoke in an interview, I think, a few days ago, basically saying that he needs to lose 20 pounds to make fighting weight. A lot's been made of it. A lot's been made of the fact that he potentially hasn't, a lot of people are saying that he hasn't had a full training camp and he's not physically ready for this fight. A lot of, I've heard other people talk about how he needs to get this done early because if it goes to the 3rd, 4th, 5th round, he's going to struggle because he hasn't had a full training camp. I don't know how much I buy into that. I feel like Jorge Masvidal has, and I've got no evidence of this and I've got nothing to back this up, this is just a feeling that I've got inside me. I feel like Jorge Masvidal has been training and I'm not sure what he walks around at, and I'm not sure what he usually how much weight he usually cuts in the last week before the fight, before weigh-ins, but I'm not sure whether he's been entirely honest in how much weight he needs to lose and what kind of training he's been partaking in. So that's one thing to bear in mind. Because he hasn't had a training camp, people are talking about his cardio, and I touched on this a little while ago, a few seconds ago in fact, and how he needs to get this done early, he's going to struggle late on in the fight, etc, etc. Again, I don't know whether cardio is going to be an issue for Jorge Masvidal. I think he's very mentally strong, and I think that he's got the experience to know how to pace himself over 5 rounds. Let's not forget, this is a guy that was fighting for the lightweight title against Gilbert Melendez about 10 years ago in Strikeforce. I think, you know, when people say, oh, you know, he's finally got his title shot and look at the circumstances that's come in his 40-something fight or whatever. I've heard that kind of narrative over the last few days. For me, it must have been a big deal for him to fight Gilbert Melendez for the Strikeforce title back in the day. It's kind of been forgotten about nowadays. He did have a title fight. Yeah, it wasn't in the UFC, but it was still a title fight. And aside from that, he's fought 5 rounds and he's been in big fights. You know, the fight against Nate Diaz and things like that. Like, I think all of those things have helped, and he's got the experience to know how to push his body throughout 25 minutes of competition. If you look at late replacements, like, here's just an example that I've made a note of over here. Like, you had Chad Mendes who stepped in against Conor McGregor, late notice, and he was chiseled and he looked in fine physical form and he wasn't in fighting shape because he gassed after 2 or 3 rounds. On the other hand, Nate Diaz, he stepped in on short notice and he had a bit of a belly on him and he wasn't in the sort of shape that we're used to seeing him in when he's had a full training camp. But he knew how to pace himself through the fight, and he had the experience that carried him through, and he didn't gas, and he got the finish, and he beat Conor McGregor in that match. So I'm not saying beating Conor McGregor is a be-all and end-all, and I know Conor McGregor is a very different opponent to Kamaru Usman, but I just feel that the experience and the mentality that Jorge Masvidal has is similar to that of Nate Diaz, and I don't think that will play in, or cardio will play in to be a factor in this fight for Jorge Masvidal in terms of the shape that he's in going into the fight. Usman hasn't had a training camp that is something that he's used to throughout his career, because obviously he's changed camp and he's now training with Trevor Whitman because he was originally training for Gilbert Burns. So how will that influence Usman in this fight? Being with a new coach, having a new corner around him in the biggest fight of his life. I don't know. I'm not saying that this is going to be a negative. I'm not saying it's going to be a positive. I'm just saying it's a change to what he's used to, and this might be an influence in how Kamaru performs come fight night. The only thing that I will add to that is the fact that Kamaru Usman was a part of Justin Gaethje's training camp for the Tony Ferguson fight. So it's not like he's come in cold to Whitman and he's just had 8 weeks with him. He's been actually almost like part of the coaching team with Whitman, getting Justin Gaethje ready for his fight. So he's had time to adjust. So again, I don't think this will be a massive factor, but it's something that might influence the outcome of this fight. The game plan that Kamaru Usman would have been working on for Gilbert Burns. Now, obviously, with a change of an opponent, how does that impact the way... So, obviously, Kamaru Usman has been getting ready for Gilbert Burns. He spent the last 6 weeks, or whatever it is, training for that opponent. So, the things that they've been working on in the gym have been for a specific opponent. Will that have an impact on how Kamaru Usman performs against Jorge Masvidal, with Jorge Masvidal being a completely different fighter to Gilbert Burns? My assessment of that is no. I feel like Kamaru Usman is a guy that relies on his strengths, and he relies on the fact that his strengths will best his opponent's strengths. And I still feel like Kamaru Usman will try to close the distance, get Jorge Masvidal against the fence, grind him down, hit him with strikes, punches, elbows, etc. Try and drop down and get the takedown when Jorge Masvidal potentially isn't expecting it. The things that he's got to be wary of are slightly different. So with Gilbert Burns, I think he had less to worry about on the feet in trying to close the distance. But once the distance closed and he's got Gilbert Burns down, I think he had more to worry about with Gilbert Burns, because obviously Gilbert Burns is such a strong BJJ player. With Jorge Masvidal, he's got to basically be wary of the variety of strikes that Jorge Masvidal is capable of, and just strikes coming from different angles and different combinations, etc. But once the distance is closed, and if he's able to get Jorge Masvidal against the fence, if he's able to get him down, he's got less to worry about once Jorge Masvidal is on the deck. Another thing that I think Kamaru Usman is going to definitely rely on is the fact that he's physically stronger. I saw little pockets in the fight between Jorge Masvidal and Nate Diaz, where Nate Diaz was able to get Jorge Masvidal against the fence. And I don't know whether Jorge Masvidal was taking breaks and just using those times to just have a rest, or whether he just physically couldn't get out of that position. And Nate Diaz was able to control Jorge Masvidal's upper body. Now, if it's the case where Jorge Masvidal just couldn't get out of that position, then he's going to have a lot more trouble with Kamaru Usman, because that is definitely one of Kamaru Usman's strengths. And with watching Kamaru Usman do that to Tyron Woodley, I'd be very confident in saying that he can do that to Jorge Masvidal. The thing also that will play... A thing that will help Kamaru Usman, I'm not going to say play into his favour over Jorge Masvidal, is the fact that his last two fights have gone 5 rounds. So going into the Tyron Woodley fight, Kamaru Usman in a championship fight may have had the confidence that I can do these 5 rounds. But there's a difference in telling yourself you can do something and knowing that you can do something because you've just done it. And with Kamaru Usman doing it against Tyron Woodley, admittedly, he kind of controlled that fight from start to finish. But then also against Colby Covington, where there were periods in that fight where Covington was getting success, but he was able to push through those periods of the fight and eventually get a finish in the 5th round. That will help Kamaru Usman in pacing himself throughout a fight if it does go 5 rounds. So here's kind of my outlook on the fight itself. I think Kamaru Usman is going to want to impose his will on Jorge Masvidal. I think there's enough evidence to show that you can get in close to Jorge Masvidal, and I think there's evidence to show you can take Jorge Masvidal down. And if you've taken him down, I think Kamaru Usman will be the favourite to win the fight, because I think he'll be able to control Jorge Masvidal, and I think he'll be able to do a lot of damage to Jorge Masvidal if he's got Jorge Masvidal against the fence or on the ground. On the other hand, Jorge Masvidal clearly has carried power up to the welterweight division. I think he's got finishes against Darren Till, obviously, finished Ben Askren, obviously, and Nate Diaz, who's notorious for having a good chin. He was able to hurt him repeatedly throughout that fight. Jorge Masvidal clearly is a better striker than Kamaru Usman. Now, I personally saw Kamaru Usman is an improved striker. His stand-up has improved in the fight against Colby Covington. But Colby Covington did hit Kamaru Usman multiple times, and he was able to hurt Kamaru Usman a few times throughout the fight. He stunned Kamaru Usman a couple of times. Now, if Jorge Masvidal connects, I don't know whether it will just be him stunning Kamaru Usman or if he's actually going to hurt and drop Kamaru Usman. So that's something that Jorge Masvidal, I think, will be looking to do throughout that fight. Going back to Kamaru Usman, I think he was open to striking a lot more with Colby Covington, because both of them are strong grapplers, and I don't think either of them wanted to enter into a grappling exchange. And I think both of them had the kind of mindset that I'm a better striker than him, so they were just striking throughout the fight. However, in this fight, Kamaru Usman, I don't know whether he's going to play that game with Jorge Masvidal, and I think if he does close the distance, it won't be to try and hit, it will be try and grab a hold of Jorge Masvidal and take him down. This is the biggest test for Jorge Masvidal. Like, he's been talking for the last couple of years about how he's had this switch in mindset. And this switch in mindset has manifested itself, just shown to manifested for some reason. But it's manifested itself in the way Jorge Masvidal fights. I feel like Jorge Masvidal has started to fight with kind of, I wouldn't say reckless abandon, but he started to take more risks, because I think he believes in himself more. And I think with him taking, like, before the Darren Till fight, Jorge Masvidal was more of a passive fighter. He kind of let the fight come to him, and he relied on his well-roundedness to react to what his opponent was doing. I feel like now he's the guy that wants to hit first, and he wants to impose himself with his striking, and he's the one that wants to make something happen rather than trying to wait for an opening. He wants to create a moment where he can see the opening, rather than waiting for his opponent to make a mistake. He wants the opponent to react to what he's doing, to see the opening, to expose that, and to hurt his opponent. I hope I've made sense when I say that. And with this change in mindset, he's been talking about how, I'm just going to go out there and kill motherfuckers, man. And that's a really shit impression. But that's the kind of mindset he's going in there with. And this is the ultimate test of it. Like, you're going in there with a guy that on paper has the skills that have exposed your skills throughout your career. He's been talking about how he's been working with kind of really high level wrestlers over the last few years, since he's been working with Yoel, or training with Yoel Romero, I should say. So that's another thing that we're going to see. Have you really improved with your wrestling? Are you able to stop Kamaru Usman from taking you down? Are you able to stop Kamaru Usman from holding you against the fence? Now, when it comes to my prediction of this fight, everything that I've just laid out over the last 15 minutes or so, it makes it sound like I think Kamaru Usman is going to win. And if I just evaluate the skills of both fighters, logic would suggest that that should be the case. Kamaru Usman should win. But I've picked against Jorge Masvidal in his last 3 fights. And in each of those 3 fights, Jorge Masvidal has proved me wrong. Which is why, and I'm not going to say this makes any sense, and I'm not going to tell you guys that you should do what or think how I'm thinking, but something in my head is telling me that this fight is going to be a crowning moment for Jorge Masvidal. And I don't know how, I don't know why, but my gut instinct is telling me that Jorge Masvidal is going to win. I genuinely do believe that there's something to be said for this change in mindset for Jorge Masvidal. And I think that we've seen sides to his game that we didn't see before he had this gap and this break doing that reality show, whatever he was doing. And we saw that in the Darren Till fight, even though Darren Till did knock him down. We definitely saw that in the Ben Askren fight, because who does that? He was willing to risk ending up on the canvas with Ben Askren on top of him to land that knee. And it came off. But the fact that he had the mindset where he's willing to risk that is something that he didn't show prior. The way he fought against Nate Diaz. Now, I'm not saying Nate Diaz is a world beater, and I'd sit here and say Kamaru Usman would probably beat Nate Diaz. But the way he performed on that night, in that moment, with the magnitude of the event, I feel like mentally Jorge Masvidal is ready to show the world what he's capable of. And I feel like this fight here, he's going to prove it to everyone. I think Jorge Masvidal is going to beat Kamaru Usman. I don't know how. I don't know whether he's going to finish him. I don't know whether he's going to repeatedly hurt him and it's going to go 5 rounds. But I just think Jorge Masvidal is going to walk away the new welterweight champion of the world. Apologies, this has been a bit longer than I wanted it to be, but let me know what you guys think. Put your comments below. How do you think this fight's going to go? What do you make of the stuff that I've said throughout this whole video? Share this with a friend if you've enjoyed it. Like it. Subscribe if you haven't already. Please subscribe. I'm trying to, my aim was to get to 500 subscribers by the end of the year, and we're in July now, and I'm on like 420 or something like that. So I'm gonna smash my fucking target. So let's get there before my birthday in August. How about that? But anyway, man, look, this is probably my last video for the week, so enjoy the fights. I know I fucking will, and I'll catch up with you guys on Sunday morning. I'll probably be sat here first thing in the morning with a coffee, haven't even brushed my teeth yet, filming myself talking to complete strangers. I'll catch you guys next time.